My name's Ron Chute.
Thank you.
And David Forsyth.
Thank you very much. Whenever you're ready, gentlemen.
My background, I'm a boilermaker welder by trade. I'm also a qualified youth worker and community services worker. And thank you very much for this opportunity to let me speak. I'd like to say that I have permission from senior elders to speak on their behalf. I have a skin name, Bunambir Damarangi. I belong to the Gupapunyu clan at Milingimbi Island in northeast Arnhem Land. I've had the privilege of living with Indigenous people for 22 years, with 9 years of that being married into family. I'd like to start with a comment from the first speaker yesterday morning, who stated that he had been working with Indigenous people for 50 years and knows them well. What I can say is that unless you have been adopted or married into family, know your relations by their skin name, know the laws and know your place in the kinship system, you really know nothing about Indigenous people. It was also stated that there are no towns around the Beetaloo Basin where they want to start fracking. That's true, there are no towns, but there are quite a few homelands around there and hundreds more scattered right throughout the NT that ain't on the map. They're there because they don't like living in towns or communities, and it keeps their children away from the influences of grog and gunja. These people mainly live off the land and not out of the supermarket and rely on fresh water for their survival. If fracking is to be done near these homelands and a fracked well is compromised and contaminates their water supply, where do these people go? They've already been discriminated against, marginalised and disempowered. What next? No more homelands? Indigenous people don't know anything about fracking, mainly because the NLC, the Northern Land Council, won't let anybody go out there and talk to them, just as they did when the Commonwealth Government was looking for a nuclear waste dump. Gas money goes a long way. Just as it did when Woodside wanted to build a gas plant at James Price Point, northwestern Australia. The Kimberley Land Council received $15 million to go out and gather signatures. The gas mob, they play dirty. How about, just for once, we put Indigenous interests front and centre, because they are the ones that will be the mostly impacted from this dirty, filthy, polluting industry called fracking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chute. Yes, Mr. Forsyth.
I'm here just representing myself, my children, and any of my friends who might hear this and agree with me.
Thank you.
And I was contacted because I was interested in this issue, and I was contacted and asked if I would consider coming to the inquiry. I was actually away, and so I haven't had much time to prepare. Where I was at Mataranka with my children, where my son first learnt to swim in the pool there, and it's a pretty big tourist spot up here, and a lot of people come from down south to experience that fresh water that flows through the thermal pools. That's where I was when I was told about this, and I've just come this weekend from the Douglas Daly region, where people also go to experience that amazing fresh water and thermal springs that are there. So the attraction of water in a dry landscape is pretty big draw card for the territory with regard to tourism. But what I want to talk about is water, the concept of water is life. People may have heard that term before, and I think it goes along, our connection to water. Civilization was formed along the rivers, the major rivers of the earth, and then spread out from there. And fresh water sustains human life and is vital for human health. It's recognised throughout all the foundational belief systems of human society. All religions focus to water. Baptisms in Christianity happen in water. Full water immersions have happened for thousands of years. Muslim people bathe in fresh water regularly as a purifying agent. It's a spirit. Our connection to water is spiritual. It's not just a resource that is there to be mined. It's recognised as the source of our life. And Australia recognises the importance of water, and we know that we're considered a dry continent. There's a lot of desert in Australia. So we've instituted legislation that protects water, and we have the Water Act, and the Northern Territory Water Act has allocations of water for water users across the Northern Territory, and I looked it up recently. They have a scale of priority in seasons of dry weather when there's less rainfall. A high security level would be, I think, 4, and that's they're entitled to something like 80% of their maximum allocation, whereas if you're at level 1, you might only be entitled to 15% of your allocation. And I discovered that there was intention for the mining industry to fit into this system, because the way I understand it, it's based on a finite resource that's measured, and then the allocation is made from the estimated, obviously an estimate of what's available, and then allocations are given. But that doesn't apply to the mining industry. From what I've read in the Environmental Defenders Office website, it says that these allocations don't apply to the mining industry. So I'm not a scientist, but I don't understand how you have a finite resource with a limited amount, and that there are allocations made to people to use that resource, but then there's a whole other section that doesn't apply to. Where does that fit into the equation? I don't understand that. There are moves. I got an email from the people in the department responsible for water, that there are moves to include the mining industry in those allocations. So I'm curious as whether the government would approve fracking before that legislation has been put through, or that allocation estimates have been made. How could, and if we're following the precautionary principle, which I was glad to read in the report, with goodwill, try to follow that principle, because in essence, the element of risk is going to be there. There's a lot that we don't know, and so, but in essence, if we can follow that, then the allocation of water would have to be determined before any approvals would be made. I'm just saying that from my perspective. I don't know technically what's responsible. So why I'm concerned about fracking is that the use of water from the system is a major concern. The people I spoke to at Mataranka were concerned about how that's going to affect their water supply for the springs and natural flow. And then if there's a reduction in natural flow, then that directly affects their income. And also there were pastoralists in that area who were concerned about their access to how it's going to impact in dry seasons, how it's going to impact on their water allocation if someone's drawing water that they consider to be theirs. That was just through conversations I had with people there. I had read a fair bit about what happens when water is put back into the mine holes, and I think that the report addressed that and recommended that water not be put back into the wells. So then that leaves with the problem of what happens with all that excess contaminated water. And I'm a bird watcher, and I know that birds are attracted to open bodies of water and will drink it. So I have concerns just on that very basic level of animals that come across that water, contaminated water, drinking it. And then, I've lived in the Northern Territory for 20 years, and I've said, well, when I first got here, with all this land, how come the development's only along certain corridors? And I was told clearly, well, most of it's underwater for a lot of the time. So in the time that I've been here, I've heard multiple reports of tailings dams overflowing at Ranger Mine. I was a volunteer with emergency services and attended flooding events at people's houses, which weren't unnatural flooding. It was just the normal flow of water in the top end. It's underwater a lot of the time. So I'm very concerned about how anyone, if any mining that happens within this northern region, how anyone proposes to contain water inside on the ground. I'm very dubious about any claims that can be done effectively, because I've seen lots of occasions where it can't. And once that water escapes, then the precautionary principle of not allowing any harm is blown, because whatever is in that tailings dam or in that contaminated water then is spread in the environment. I'm also concerned about the comment that, and I've heard it said before, I would like to thank everyone who's spoken before, because it's pretty much covered everything I want to say, but the dilution of the chemicals doesn't make sense to me either. I did study a little bit of environmental science, and I was taught that a lot of chemicals, if they're not biodegradable over a period of time, a lot of chemicals that are persistent in the environment will accumulate. And so they are going to accumulate, but the question is where. So how do we remove them? How is that kept discreet and on-site, and then removed from that location, and then treated in a way that doesn't end up back in our environment? But I haven't seen anything that suggests that can be done properly. When I spoke to my local member, he had fracking industry information on his window, and I asked him about, because I was told, well, they're supposed to be lined pits. Now that's, from what I've read, they're not that effective anyway at keeping the water contained. But then when I looked at the legislation, there was no indication that there would be lined pits. So that was in the Northern Territory legislation. So it was lacking detail on, this is just at a brief look. I'm given some information, I go and try and find out what does that mean, and when I look, I don't find the answers that I'm looking for. So as a member of the public and a voter, and someone who's seen enough mistakes made, I'm dubious about the ability of this industry to contain its impact on the environment. Okay, I'll need to wrap it up, I suppose, but I've got a lot. I'm also told about robust regulatory framework, and I know I sound cynical, and I can be, but I don't understand what that is. I've heard it used many times. I remember when the MacArthur River mine, which isn't in any way related to fracking, but this is when we're talking about regulation, we're talking about the public's ability to trust our government to maintain conditions that will protect our environment and the people from the hazards of mining. And I remember when there was a proposal to expand the MacArthur River mine, the people of Borroloola were against it. They didn't want that to happen. There were environmental concerns about that happening that came from across the community. And what we saw there was a government that retrospectively changed the law to allow the mine to be expanded. And what we've subsequently seen is the contamination of the river and widespread pollution from that. Now, this is under a robust regulatory framework. And that's one example. And I'm sure there are multiple. I looked up mines, and I think Australia's got thousands of, from what I've read, thousands of mines that have been deserted. Now that can range from me digging a small gold mine or whatever. But the problem is, and I think is a matter of time. And what we're talking about now, we're talking about the future. What will happen in the future, and we're making plans. We're going to put regulations in. We're going to make sure that all these things from the past don't happen, and that in the future things are going to be better. But every time a decision's been made to advance one of these developments, the same process is followed, that we say, well, we're not going to make those mistakes. As soon as the decision's made, the future is pushed to the past. And then we say, oh, well, when they made that decision about the MacArthur River mine, that was in the past. They didn't, they did the best they could, but they didn't have all the information. We hear those stories all the time. That's what we're fed back. So as a member of the public, I have cause not to trust the language that's used to try and push this on me. With regard again to water, I've spent time and the sacredness of water. I have been lucky to spend time on country with the people of the land, and the things that are special to them that they show me is the fresh water source. Where does the fresh water come from? I have people who are Aboriginal people who I know who come to Darwin regularly, and their favourite thing to do is to go hunting for shellfish or crabs in the local creeks. There's signs on our creeks now that say you cannot take those shellfish from the creek because the creek is contaminated because of the sewerage outlet. Now, in a lot of the places where the effects of mining occur, you're not going to have, and people will still go and take them because they don't, the idea that that's going to contaminate their food source doesn't really sink into people. There's going to be mining, there's going to be contamination, as there always has been, that isn't recorded, and people are living in an unhealthy environment, doing what they've always done, expecting that the same sources of their food and water are as clean as they've always been. I realise I'm talking for a long time, and I think I'll leave it at that now. But my children, I came to the Territory 20 years ago. I've read up also about the inequity in scales of pay, and when mining communities strike up in places where people earn less money, and it does create inequity. Aboriginal people do end up worse off, or poor people, or the people who live there. And I am concerned that I chose to live here, and I want to make this my home. I know that, and from what I've seen, I've met lots of people who come up from mining. They come here to make money so that they can go home and build their nest egg and feather their nest in the nice place where they live. They're not thinking of advancing the place where they come to. It's a financial proposition to them. I don't think it's a great advance to the people who are left with the residue of mining in 30, 40 years. I don't know what they will think after the miners leave, and I don't trust that the poisons, toxins from the mines can be kept underground indefinitely for as long as the people have already lived here on this land. I don't think that the contamination can be contained for as long as it will be needed for us to go on living here indefinitely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth. Are there any questions? Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Mr. Forsyth, I just wanted to ask a question about some of your initial presentation was focused on community concerns about water use, and particularly talk about Mataranka area and the thermal springs there. So I was just wondering, what are people thinking in terms of fracking in the broader picture of water use, in the sense as you know, the pastoral industry are major water users from that aquifer. We've got irrigated horticulture in Katherine, and as you know, there's great pushes for more irrigated agriculture, and it's all, all coming from that same aquifer. So where do you think, how are people perceiving fracking in that broader water use and water extraction picture?
I didn't interview people. I just spent a little bit of time there and spoke to people, and their concern is that they have water allocations that they have to fight for, that they have to negotiate, and they're concerned. The people who I spoke to were concerned that their access to the water that they currently expect could be reduced. One of the questions I would like to ask is, if mining is granted, it has to go through the same process, and is on that scale of 1 to 4 priority for water security, where would mining sit on that scale? Would they be at number 4 or 5? I'm not sure if it was 4 or 5. Would they sit at the highest level and have water 80% of their allocation guaranteed at the expense of local pastoralists or food growers? Yeah. I think would be their concern. If there's a time of shortage, will they be pushed out and will they have less access to water?
Thank you. Anyone else? Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today and taking the time to present. We're very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you.